Hello and welcome to the Northern Myths podcast, where we explore the myths and legends of Northern Europe from an archetypal perspective. I'm Luke DeWolf.
And I'm Dan Larrabee.
Today we're continuing our series on the Havamal, Odin's Book of Wisdom. Dan, would you like to tell us a little bit about the Havamal?
For sure. So, as you're saying, it's Odin's Book of Wisdom, or Wisdom of the High One, sometimes Wisdom of the One-Eyed, a bunch of sort of different titles for it. And the poem itself is made up of 4 separate poems. The first part being sort of how to treat a guest in your house. And we actually finished that in the last episode on the Havamal. And just a quick recap, it kind of covered, when a guest comes over, how do you properly welcome them into your home? Another thing it covered was don't drink too much. And it often reminded us not to drink too much. That's probably one of the overarching themes in that one. As well as just being prepared for everyday life. So like looking around corners and knowing your surroundings before you open your mouth and start talking and, talking bad about people. So today we'll be looking at what's called Odin's love poem and his views on how to woo women, how to properly, interact with them. And, well, I don't want to give too much away, but if you've seen the Skirnismal episode, it's unfortunately somewhat similar, but there is some, I think there is some good lessons there that we can kind of extrapolate on and go from there. That I know I'm looking forward to getting into that. So
absolutely, and we actually dipped into it a little bit. This Odin's love poem in the last time, or at least what's traditionally considered Odin's love poem. But we're starting where it kind of gets obvious that that's what he's talking about anyway. So if you'd like to hear all that Dan's just recapped for you, everything we've been talking about here, we have, what was it, episodes 4, 6, 9, I think were our episodes on the Havamal, if you'd like to go back and give those a listen. But this one is still fairly standalone, so we should be able to kind of cover this one without you having to have too much background in this if you're kind of just getting started with us and haven't listened to those episodes, but would still highly encourage it.
Definitely. Actually, this is a good spot to kind of jump in because it is kind of self-contained. And I think we should be able to get through the entirety of Odin's love poem, or the section that's considered that, because in the Havamal, it kind of goes from one area to the next without any real warning, but the topic sort of drastically changes and you kind of know, oh, I'm in something different.
Exactly. So this time, the first poem, it was incredibly long, and we needed 3 episodes to get through that. But this one, yeah, we're planning to do that in just this one episode. So let's just dive into it, I guess, and see how it goes.
For sure.
Although before we get too far into it, our usual acknowledgement to Jackson Crawford, and we are reading his translation of the Poetic Edda. So thanks to him and thanks to Hackett Publishing for letting us use it. It's a great translation, highly readable. Definitely would encourage you to pick it up and follow along with us. And as well, he's got a great YouTube channel that goes into a lot of great information about Norse mythology in general, as well as a lot of good stuff about Old Norse in particular. He's a professor of, I don't actually recall if it's specifically linguistics or if it's the Germanic studies or something like that, but he's a professor at the University of Colorado, Boulder. So that's just a little bit about Jackson Crawford, and again, highly encourage you to pick up his translation of the Poetic Edda to follow along with us.
Sounds good.
And with that, I think we're just going to dive into it. We're going to start with stanza 84. Back to the poem. No man should trust the words of a girl, nor anything a woman says. Women's hearts are molded on a wobbly wheel. Deception lurks in their words. Dan, what do you think of that?
Well, we're just getting right into it, aren't we? So I think I'll take a look at it from 2 perspectives. One is like the actual words that are written on the page, but also a possible archetypal reasoning for this. So I'm going to start off by saying I don't know. I don't know if this is just, face value wisdom from Odin. I mean, there probably is there definitely is some value here just on its face, and I'll get into that in a bit. And I think there is archetypal wisdom here as well, but I'm quite willing to accept that maybe there's just, misogyny in the culture, and, here we are talking about, why you can't trust what a woman says. So I'm quite willing to accept that as the reality of the time. But I do think there's some value here that we can look at that that is bigger than just the genders and the sexes and the interactions between men and women. But I'll start with interactions between men and women. I think, and we're going to see this as we go on, in Odin's love poem, he talks about the dangers of listening to women. But then in the second half, you get very clear examples of the dangers of listening to men as well. So both sides get it, and I would say pretty equally, just in slightly different ways. And I think that's right, because men and women are, I would say, equally deceitful. There might be, differences in the way they're deceitful. And again, these are generalizations. Like they wouldn't, this isn't like a hard and fast rule that men are only going to be deceitful in this way and women are only going to be deceitful in that way. But I would say in general, if you're to sort of make that graph, there'd be overlap in the middle, but at the extremes, in general, men would do it this way and women would do it the other way. And we'll see that coming up.
Yeah, we will get into that. We're just, saving that for a little bit later. But
sure.
I am glad that you mentioned that men are going to get this equally here. It's not just, even though this is kind of a common complaint about this section of the Havamal here, is that it really is, it looks like it's bashing women somewhat unfairly, but the stories, the sort of mini stories that are within this section of the poem, they are a lot more illustrative of a balanced approach here and reasons not to trust either men or women. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Absolutely. And I'm doing that at the beginning just so we can lay the groundwork, at least from where we're coming from, so we're not like, yeah, women, terrible, because we don't think that. So
no, even though that's going to be the soundbite, though, that
absolutely,
that people pick out.
That's now the soundbite, and the podcast is over, and we're done. Yeah. So the reason why, sort of one of the first things we learn is that we shouldn't trust the words of a girl nor anything a woman says. I think there's actually a reason to start with warnings about women, and sort of in a very real, literal sense, a man is sort of brought into consciousness by women because sort of his life is going normally, but then when he has to sort of show his value as a man, he's usually trying to impress a woman because he's interested in her in a romantic sense. And his value and self-worth is determined by her response, at least initially. And I think the reason why you're warning men first is that their reaction is much more dangerous than a woman's reaction to being turned down. And the other thing too is I think women have to learn this kind of stuff a lot earlier, and it's more natural. There is sort of a natural sense, I would say, that women are more vulnerable to men than men are to women. And I remember when I was thinking about this, I almost said more fragile, and that is definitely the wrong word. But vulnerable, I think, is the right word, that women are much more vulnerable to men than vice versa, simply because men are, in general, physically more powerful and their ability to do violence is much greater than a woman's ability to do violence. So I kind of take this as as a warning to men, and sort of like an introduction that, like, okay, this is what's going to happen. You're going to have these feelings like women are terrible and awful. And if you're prepared for that, maybe it's not going to be so bad, and you can kind of steel yourself against it, because even just getting turned down by women, I mean, the immediate reaction, especially if you weren't expecting it, might be, oh, women are terrible and they lie and all this kind of stuff. Well, if you were prepared for that possible outcome, maybe you won't go off and kill them. And that's sort of what that's where I went with this, was that, again, you have to corral men in because they're wild and able to do real damage.
Right. That's a fantastic point. And yeah, I am glad that you went there, because again, on the face of it, this looks like a pretty messy thing to be kind of saying here. But if we're looking at it in a context of, first of all, yeah, this is something that women have to know in order to protect themselves, right? In order to not be killed by a bad reaction in a man, which is certainly nothing that they can control, just something that they have to be prepared for, right? Giving that same warning to men, I think that is appropriate here and helpful, because it does say that, you're not always going to get a predictable reaction from a woman. And you can extend that. People in general aren't predictable because they're a whole different person. Even your spouse is an entirely different person from you, and it can be quite unpredictable how they're going to react. Even if you think you know exactly what they're going to say or something like that, you've been married for however much time, maybe one day that they suddenly react differently from what you're expecting because they're a different person. And that really just, I think that's sort of a positive takeaway from that, is just to be careful with anyone you're interacting with, because they can react unpredictably. But then we get into another side of it, which is the archetypal nature of it. And I enjoyed the wording here. Wobbly wheel in particular was really, really interesting to me, because there's an idea, and we've certainly touched on the idea of cyclical time, especially in the Voluspa episodes. We really got into that in that cycle of 3. That's our first 3 episodes if you want to take a look, and you haven't already. But the idea of cyclical time was a big deal, and this wording here, wobbly wheel, reminded me of actually a song by one of my favorite artists, Einar Selvik, who did a collaboration with the guy Ivar Björnsson from the band Enslaved, and they did this collaboration called Skugsha, and they had a song called Kvarvandi, which means turning, and it's got a line in there, essentially saying time is a wheel, not a line. And to me, that entire thing, well, the whole song in general, was about the turning of time and how the cycles repeat themselves and how fate repeats itself and lays itself down. And so this concept of the wheel as time, for women to be on a wobbly wheel, that was just really funny to me, because that certainly echoes their idea, the idea that, it's chaotic, that they are symbolically representative of chaos on a symbolic level, again, just to be clear, but it's unpredictability. It's potential. The wheel could go anywhere. It could do anything. And if you extend that to time, it's like it could go anywhere. It could do anything. And that's where creation comes in a literal sense. So I thought that was really, really cool wording there.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I really like that too. And I'm glad you went there, because I was going to say on an archetypal level, we're seeing, if we take women as the symbol of chaos. And again, when we say chaos, it's not a bad thing. It's just unknown, and it's potential, and there's potential for good and for bad. And sometimes what seems bad actually turns out to be good. It's just, I don't know how to, it's hard to actually put it into words in a comprehensive way, because it's just sort of everything that might happen. And I know in the guest part, I made a comparison between how you should treat a guest is kind of how you should treat chaos. Is you should welcome it in and consciously be with it. And I'm going to try and extend that with the love poem as well. That this is kind of a warning, archetypally, that just because chaos has everything going on in it and good and bad can come out, there does need to be a level of distrust, basically to keep you honest with it, so that you're not cutting corners and you're not taking things for granted that you shouldn't take for granted. And then, instead of being able to build something amazing, you miss this one little part and it falls apart on you, and then it's a disaster. So sort of taking the long view of it from, 37,000 feet, that's sort of, when I was reading Odin's love poem, I saw that in there as well, that if you expand it into symbolism, again, you're still getting how do you deal with chaos, and then when you sort of magnify it, you're getting, how does a man deal with a woman? And it's something else about that is for men, women, and I'll say in general there's so many jokes about just, men not knowing how to deal with women. Like it's a common theme. We've seen it in virtually every story ever told. Shakespeare, talks about it. It's, you can't avoid it. And I'll say this, one of the reasons why, and it's also one of the reasons why women would be considered witches and things like that, is if you're a man, and I'll say, heterosexual man, and you see a beautiful woman, and you don't have sort of the scientific explanations of, increased heart rate and various chemicals mixing in your body because there's this beautiful woman here, you're just going to see this woman and she is going to make you're going to feel jittery and you're going to be sweating and your mind is going to be blank. You're not going to be able to talk. Even like the most brave and eloquent men can find themselves tongue-tied, in a very attractive woman, or in the presence of a very attractive woman. And how could you not think that's like a magic power, and like sort of chaos just, it takes you completely out of your normal comfort zone and throws you directly into the unknown, and you didn't go searching it out. It just sort of happened to you. So there's a lot of ways to react to that. And I think we're going to see the sort of warning men about that, so that they actually have some sort of idea of what's going on and they don't just fly off the handle.
Right. And, I think it's incredibly positive to have something like this, or at least attempt to have something like this, where it's like, here, at least try and learn from my mistakes or my dealings with women, my being Odin, like Odin's mistakes and his dealings with women. Like he's trying to say here, like, this is my experience and this is maybe how you can kind of game the system a little bit. And certainly some people would react negatively to that. And I can understand that reaction on some level, where it's like, you're trying to manipulate women's emotions or things like that to be successful with them. At the same time, it's also kind of, what would you like us men to do? Like, just continue bumping around being ignorant and all that, or have a little bit of idea how to operate in the world and how to relate to women in a positive way. And I do want to emphasize that it should be in a positive manner. It shouldn't be for sexual conquests or anything like that. Like, this should be for the goal of, you see someone that you really, really like, and then maybe you actually go and try and talk to her or them, if you want to extend this to whoever, go and talk to them, have a conversation, and start playing that little relationship game, that courtship game that, these days that's migrated onto Tinder or Bumble or whatever the latest app is. I got, taken. I've been with my girlfriend, my wife now, but back when Tinder was around, she was my girlfriend and everything like that. And I've been with my wife for now like 8 years. So I never experienced those apps. So whatever you kids are doing these days, but that's where that's going these days, that kind of courtship ritual. That's what this is. That's what this love poem is kind of going to describe. And, I see nothing wrong with having some kind of this isn't really a cheat sheet. This is just kind of like a warning. Here's what you might expect, and here's how you might deal with it. So just as a preamble here, this stanza was really good, actually, as a primer here, right? So,
and the other good thing about it is that it is coming from Odin, at least in a symbolic way. Like, that's the understanding of these stories. So no matter what you're going through, like, well, if Odin can do it and he's the All-Father and he had to go through this, well, I guess I'm going to have to too. So that's if you're looking at this like for wisdom, it's kind of like a comforting thought that even the All-Father had to deal with this. So
had to have some relationship trouble. You're not alone. That's a good one too, right?
Yeah.
You're not alone no matter who you are. So haven't we talked about before where it's like a lot of teens, if they just realized that literally everyone was going through the same trouble, they would feel a lot less alone. I think we've touched on that before.
Definitely.
But anyway, I think good time to move on.
Definitely.
And we're going to do 4 stanzas here. These are really interesting, actually. And I think you'll see why we're grouping them all together. This is 85 through... And this is just something to be aware of here. Dr. Crawford flipped stanzas 88 and 89 because it made sense to do that. And I think you'll see why once I read it out here. But we're going from 85 to what should be 88, but is really 89. And we'll be doing the real 88 after. So just so we're clear on that. He makes a note about it, and it makes sense. So... back to the poem. A breaking bow, a burning fire, a howling wolf, a cawing crow, a grunting pig, a rootless tree, a swelling wave, a boiling kettle, a flying spear, a crashing wave, one-night-old ice, a striped snake, the words of a bride in bed, a broken sword, a playful bear, the child of a king, a sick calf, a stubborn servant, a prophet who foresees good things, a corpse on the battlefield, your brother's killer even if you meet him in public, a half-burned house, a horse that's too fast. And remember, a horse is unusable if only one foot breaks. May you never be so trusting that you trust all these things.
I actually really love this because it's just cold, hard reality, like slapping in the face. Because all of these things, well, you can't trust them, but you might be inclined to trust them for whatever reason. And it's one of those things that you wouldn't think about it. These are all things where if you're a kid and you did them and something bad happened, but you were okay, your parent would be like, what were you thinking? And then you'd say, I didn't think. And they just cut you off right there and be like, you're right, you didn't think. And all of these things are dangerous, but a lot of them are also super commonplace. And it's funny to think that we brush up against all of these, even today, like we brush up against a lot of these things very commonly, and we take it for granted, but really like they can do damage, like a boiling kettle. If you're not careful, you'll burn yourself. Like that's just how it is. Burning fire also, it has that duality where we need it to live, especially in the colder climates, and to cook our food and all that kind of stuff. But it's also the same thing that burns down our houses and, destroys forests and, kills people. So I really love this list. And I don't know, it's not like a comprehensive list, but they really cover a lot of interesting territory. I like a striped snake, and I know here's an example of me where I would be in danger of this, because there's a rhyme about striped snakes, and it's like black on red and you're dead, and black on yellow, you're an okay fellow. But I could be wrong. It could be like black on yellow, you're a dead fellow. I don't know. So I'm just going to stay away from striped snakes. But it really shows you the duality of these things, because some of the things you can potentially trust, like a cawing crow might just be cawing and a crow, or maybe there's something in the woods that's bothering it that it's going to come charging out at you. So, yeah.
Yeah, all of these things here, they have potential, they have positive potential, so you could be lured in by them, right? Like even some of these things that look specifically negative or specifically like they wouldn't apply today, like for example, a corpse on the battlefield. The positive potential, morbid as it is that you could go loot it and get some fun stuff. But they could just be hurt or something like that, and then maybe they stab you when you get close, right? I think I've heard war stories, especially on the Jocko podcast. Go check it out and get after it, by the way. Of soldier being like gravely wounded or something like that. And I think there was one from World War I where there was this guy who got caught out by a soldier on the other side, on the German side, I think. But he might have been playing dead or was in some kind of a weird situation. But he ended up getting the jump on this German who was just investigating him, and he got his gun on him, and he ended up capturing the entire German, like 30, 40 guys it must have been. And just because he got his gun on one guy, right? And he ended up capturing them, taking them back to his base, and they became prisoners of war, all because this one guy trusted this corpse on the battlefield or something like that. I'm for sure getting this entire story, all of the little details wrong. For sure I am. Go look at the Jocko podcast for more details. I'll try and remember which one it's actually on. I doubt I'll be able to remember. There's a lot of stories like that, but just something like that where it seems like it would be fully negative and fully you could trust that you know what's going on. Maybe it turns out they're not dead, or it's something that you're not expecting anyway. And then, a horse that's too fast. And I love that this line is in here. Remember, a horse is unusable if only one foot breaks. Well, what are our horses these days? Cars. A car with one wheel missing is unusable. A car with one part broken is unusable. Same thing, right? So something like always trusting on the things that are around you, or always trusting on the things that you can see plainly, is dangerous. And I think it's cautioning against blind optimism. I think that's the best word I've got for it. Like, optimism in every situation is just unrealistic. You're going to get into situations where there are dangers around you and there are things that could go wrong, and being prepared for those things, keeping your eyes and ears open for those things is positive. I mean, again, this is a big list, and I don't think I'll really touch on every single one of these, but they're all interesting, right? And many of them are seem like they would be very obvious, right? But it's really just something that says, don't immediately trust what's going on around you. Think, discern, look deeper, and do that in order to safeguard yourself, the people around you, right? Like, really, really interesting chunk here, right?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I really do see it like you're saying, like, don't be blindly optimistic, or the word that came to my mind was naive, and that sort of, I was thinking of like the young and naive, where, well, it's usually, actually most of these are usually young men that would trust a lot of these things because of testosterone, the great killer. But the one I did want to talk a little bit about was the one that says, your brother's killer even if you meet him in public. That's an interesting one, because I imagine there would be that expectation that if you're meeting your brother's killer in public, obviously the death was ruled legal for whatever reason. And the idea that you would trust the killer, to me at first was like, well, of course I wouldn't trust the killer of my brother. But if you're in public, you still have to abide by the rules of society in the game. And if it's been ruled that it was a just killing, you have to do it, but it doesn't mean you have to trust them. You can go along with the bare minimum of going through with the rules of society and existing together in society, but trusting them and trusting that those rules will protect you, that's not prudent. You definitely, he's already proved that he's going to kill someone in your family. You need to be aware that he could possibly kill you as well. And I think that you can extrapolate that for a whole bunch of things. That if someone has done wrong to, a friend of yours, you need to be wary of that person because they are obviously capable of doing harm.
Yeah, it's this one for sure. I think is one of the less obvious ones. But again, when you think about it like that, yeah, extrapolate that to modern times, because for the most part, you're not going to be bumping into someone who's murdered someone in your family. These days that wouldn't happen, but back in the day, that certainly would have happened a lot more, right? Because they were much smaller societies, and a lot of times they were just villages, right? Where that's all you would have. But, here, if you take it to where you did again, where it's like someone who's done someone harm, and you're maybe in the same social circle as them or something like that, then, don't stand for that. Don't trust them on the face of it anyway, right? And I kind of take this whole section into another direction as well here when it says, may you never be so trusting that you trust all these things. I think that also leaves it open for interpretation and discernment, because maybe you can trust something if you've gone and understood it. If you trust all these things, that's a negative because you're just naively trusting to everything, but maybe you understand what's behind some of these things, and maybe you have gone and investigated what's behind some of these signs, and maybe you now have a little bit of a better idea, and you can trust on yourself and your own instincts a little bit better. So I thought that was an interesting little nuance there, if that makes sense.
Definitely, yeah, I would absolutely agree, because there are things here like a burning fire that at some point you kind of do have to trust just to cook your own food or you're heating your house with it. So you're obviously trusting it on some level, but you're not going to just sort of let it burn wildly or not pay attention to it.
Right, exactly. Shall we move on?
Let's do it.
Okay, this is the real stanza 88, and it's in brackets in the Crawford translation. It's in position 89, but it's the real stanza 88 now. Back to the poem. Do not put too much trust in your newly planted crops, nor in your child too early. Weather will shape the field, and whim will shape the child, and neither will stay the same.
It's sort of following the same theme as what we just heard, and I can definitely see why it was the two verses were switched, because even though it has very much the same theme, it's kind of written differently. And I actually think that Dr. Crawford made a really good decision here to switch that. And I think the big message here is that, well, there's a few. One is be prepared for change, that when you start something, it's not necessarily going to work out the way you think it's going to work out. And if you put your trust in the way you think it's going to work out, chances are it's going to fall apart. And I'm trying to think of how to say this. When you plant crops and have children, chances are they're going to grow up and do their own thing, and you can't necessarily direct it. The best you can hope for is making sure that whatever they're going to be able to do their best, and they have the tools necessary to do it, but it's actually out of your hands because they're autonomous. So with crops, you can tend the field and water and fertilize them properly, but if there's a snap frost, which you have zero control over, well, if you were solely relying on that crop for sustenance or wealth or whatever, you're kind of like, you're out of luck. Sorry, there's nothing you can do about it. Same with if you're expecting your child to, well, we're in Canada, so I've seen this before where they expect their child to become like a professional hockey player. And I remember seeing people in school, like their parents are throwing good money after bad for their kid to become a professional hockey player. And the kid liked hockey a lot, but definitely wasn't as interested as you need to be to make the sacrifices necessary to get to that level. Nor do they have the natural talent. And like, these kids actually knew it themselves. They didn't have the natural talent, but their parents were just like, oh, this is going to be our golden goose. And, it was incredibly destructive to the child. So that is something as well. And I guess depending on what you do with your crops too, like, I've heard stories, I'm fairly certain they're just myths and legends where, the farmer would go and try and, pull out the sprouts, like pull them up to make them grow faster. And really you're killing the crops by doing that. So there is an important sense of patience here as well, that you sort of have to let things unfold and deal with them as they unfold. You can't plan everything.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what I wrote down here was don't count your chickens before they hatch.
Definitely.
And I mean, both of these are very good examples, right? Crops are interesting because that digs into, I mean, this echoes an agrarian society, right? Like an agriculture-based society. And the crops were vastly important, and they were vastly important on a ritual level. Like, it's highly probable that most of our foundation of religion was really formed during the agricultural period. The ideas of cyclical time, the idea of, death, life, and rebirth, that all would have come through on the agrarian phase. Certainly there's some kind of a substrate before that, which comes from more of a hunting culture, but most of our religious foundations come from having to deal with the cycle of the earth and of fertility and of unpredictability. I mean, that's why there's so much veneration of storm gods, for example, because they would, also bring rain with them, right? You would have thunder and storms and all that, but it would water your crops. And at some point they must have figured out that makes better crops. Certainly they would have figured out that prolonged drought, you don't get anything there. But no, having something like that, don't put too much trust in your newly planted crops. Yeah, it speaks to that unpredictability and needing to tend for them. I mean, like, the life of a farmer even today must be like just brutal, right? Because, there's so many things that are out of their control that they have to deal with, and it's constant work, right? And then the same thing with a child. That's different. For sure that's different, but it's that's been part of humanity for billions of years, like stretch that all the way back, right? Like, that's been part of humanity since we've been humans, since before we've been humans. And I guess the idea of having aspirations for your children, or an idea of what you want them to do in life, or being successful, the idea of being successful, I suppose, is there in all animal hierarchies, because they form their own hierarchies, and some certainly would not reproduce in a lot of cases. Like, they would have, the big alpha males that would reproduce with everyone, and then some other males that would maybe be lucky to reproduce a couple of times or something like that. But not everywhere. That's not across the board. I'm no biologist, but for us, though, for humanity, we certainly have ideas and aspirations for our children, and I think this is just caution to not dwell too much on that and let them go where they will. But certainly, you would want to direct them into something positive, and to make something good out of their life regardless of what it is that they choose. I think that's sort of the warning. It is to, as parents, not dwell too much on your ideas for them.
Definitely. I would absolutely agree. And I was thinking funny, like you tend crops, but you also kind of tend children. You encourage their growth, but without there's a fine line between tending to their growth and then pushing them where you want them to go and forcing them to live out your shattered dreams or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Really good advice, right? Yeah. Shall we move on?
Let's go.
Okay, we're back to our proper ordering of things now. Stanza 90. Take care not to love a deceitful woman. It is like driving an unshod horse, a playful, young, poorly tamed foal across slippery ice, or like sailing a ship in a wild wind, or trying to catch a reindeer on foot after the mountains thaw.
So right on the face of it, we're actually getting really good advice, and it's good advice for men and women. If you see someone who has deceitful traits, don't fall in love with them. Or if you do, because I know that love is kind of a weird thing. It's chemical and all that kind of stuff that you don't really have a lot of control over. But just because you fall in love with them doesn't mean you actually have to be with them. And as painful as that would be because you're not fulfilling that chemical urge, you're much better off in the long run because, who wants to be with a deceitful person?
Well, right. And I mean, I think this probably has something to do with discouraging being deceitful or lying on a societal level can only be good for the cohesion of society and for it to function correctly. And certainly the point that I'll make first is that you need chaos and change in order to prevent stagnation, which is really the ultimate end game of pure order is stagnation and tyranny, because you can't have anything, you can't tolerate any change if you're too tied to order, something like that. And, a deceitful woman, I think that is on a symbolic level, like highly volatile, chaotic, and certainly will provoke change, just not necessarily positive always. And I think the implication there that is being made is that deceitful people in general are hard on society. And that's not a condemnation. And certainly here it's being specific enough to say, take care not to love a deceitful woman. He's specifying a deceitful woman. And that's a good thing. First of all, he's not painting all women with the same brush, specifying just the deceitful ones. But, again, on a societal level, discouraging that trait and encouraging honesty and encouraging playing the same game as everyone else is just going to be good for the cohesion of society. That said, though, here, I mean, again, like love takes who it will, right? And, it's this imagery here is just fantastic, right? Like it's not even just like little one sentence descriptions. It's like big descriptions of like something futile. Like it's almost impossible, say, to catch a reindeer on foot after the mountains thaw. Like how specific is that? But that's also super descriptive. And I think you can even imagine how hard that would be. And that's what it's saying here, is that it's hard to have a handle on this person at any point, right? Because they're just going to tell you what they want or lie to you or whatever, and you're never going to know exactly who they are. And how do you live with that, right? That's tough. That's what this is saying.
Absolutely. I definitely get the feeling with these great examples that whoever wrote this, let's say Odin, definitely loved a deceitful woman at one point and learned the hard way that it doesn't work, and probably ignored a lot of the warning signs as well, because there's often a a willful blindness. I think with everyone, but I can't speak to women's experiences too much. But I know for myself that there is, in my past, there has been willful blindness with various women who I was quite enamored with, and I would say that they were deceitful towards me, and it just, it ends quite badly, like, sailing a ship into a wild wind, or trying to chase a reindeer after the mountains thaw. Like, yeah, so this one's a real, it cuts close to the bone. It's like a real experience that even today, most of us are experiencing. And again, he kind of singles out men. This is definitely like directed towards men as don't love a deceitful woman. And again, I would propose that it's because, well, men are dangerous. And in regards to like being deceived by a woman, like that can really bring out homicidal tendencies. There's like, that's why they have the so-called crimes of passion, right? That, and I'm not saying I haven't thought about it enough, but they'll call it a crime of passion when, a husband comes home and finds his wife in bed with another man kind of thing. And he goes into a rage and kills them both. Like, that happens. That's not like, a rare occasion. Like, that's a very real thing that happens on a regular basis when there's infidelity or deceit. So there's definitely a real need to sort of keep men under control, because that will, if there's enough of that will destabilize the society.
Right. And I want to point out here, this isn't saying to the deceitful woman, be less deceitful. And in no way are we trying to imply that any of these reactions would be the woman's fault. It would be the man's fault for going along with it for so long and then one day snapping. That would be absolutely his fault. And this would be a good warning against something like that.
Absolutely. I'm glad you put in that caveat, because absolutely it's the man's fault for going to that length of violence or whatever. It's and that's why I'm talking about the crime of passion, because I'm not sure I buy that I can understand feeling those feelings, but then what you do with those feelings is completely up to you, and you're not at the will of your passion. So,
well, I think your point was correct, where it's like you get, these urges or something like that. I'm not speaking from experience, but certainly like if you get the testosterone pumping and the rage and the anger and all that, like, I think it's your fault for avoiding that situation in the first place. And I think for the most part, certainly there can be some cases where this is true, but I think for the most part, if you get yourself into a situation where you are cheated on, let's say, or lied to consistently, you're also playing a part in that by not seeing what's going on.
For sure. Kind of that willful blindness before the great fall and everything, the catastrophe, like that's very archetypal.
Exactly. And then if you go and kill your wife and her lover, like, that's still on you, man. Like,
still on you. Yeah, you will at least find no sympathy from us. Like,
no, and maybe that would be called like either manslaughter or second degree murder or something like that. It's not premeditated or something like that. And sure, fine. But I think these warnings, the fact that they exist, maybe premeditation isn't all that's required to have full responsibility and need to take the full punishment. And in fact, I would say you've got to take full responsibility for your own actions just in general. And something like this, having these warnings here, this is enough for me to say, like, yeah, like if you hear this and then you go off and be with a deceitful woman or a deceitful man or a deceitful person in general, whatever, yeah, you're playing a dangerous game. And on some level, I think you have to know what's going on, right?
Absolutely. And just to bring this back to the stanzas about things that you shouldn't trust completely. Or what is it? May you never be so trusting that you trust all these things like breaking bow and a burning fire. When I read this stanza, it made me think of Cain from Cain, like the Cain and Abel story, that this is how that type of thing happens, where you're ignoring the deceit of this person, and then at the end something terrible happens, and you think sort of bitterly to yourself, well, I did this and I did that, and how could this have happened? And it's not hard to get from that bitterness over a deceitful person to generalizing that and hating existence itself. Like, that's not a far, because you can no longer trust yourself and your understanding of the world. Well, do you want to take that burden on yourself, or do you want to say, well, it's not me, I'm doing everything right, it's the world? And this is like one of the open doors to thinking that it's the world's fault and not your own. So it's definitely a good warning, because one, you never want to go through that door where you're thinking that it's the world's fault and not your own. Being able to take responsibility means you can do something about it. And I mean, if that isn't the most hopeful idea of all time kind of thing, then I don't know what it is, because you can actually make your situation better.
Totally. Couldn't agree more. Shall we move on?
Let's do it.
Back to the poem. I'll speak. Oh my God.
This is actually ironic. I love that.
I'm going to try that all one more time. Back to the poem. I'll speak plainly now, since I know both men. I'm sorry. This had to happen at least once.
Especially on the part that says, I'll speak plainly.
So funny. I'll speak plainly now, since I know both men and women. Men lie to women. We speak most eloquently when we tell the biggest lies, and seduce even wise women with lies.
Well, here we have I would say the balancing of the two, where we spoke about women, and now we're actually warning women about the various tactics that men use to get what they want. And it doesn't actually explicitly say men will lie to women to get sex, but there is sort of that idea when they talk about seducing even a wise woman with lies. And sort of on the literal level, men have a very high sex drive, again, testosterone, and if they aren't directed properly, they'll do whatever they need to do to have sexual relations with a woman to procreate. And again, I say not properly directed because I don't want to take any responsibility away from a man and, where he is or who he is procreating with and what he's doing to get that opportunity to procreate. But I think you can direct that properly, and we'll see that in the next stanza, sort of the proper way to do it. But I mean, I think we've all met those rogues and scoundrels who will say sort of whatever they need to say to get with a woman, and then leave them when they get bored, and they'll have made all these promises. And actually, I think I'll talk about this too. I know there's a stereotype that in high school, a guy who sleeps with a lot of women is considered like a stud, and a girl who sleeps with a lot of guys is a slut. But I actually haven't met too many people who, when you're a teenager and someone has sex, in your friend group, and you're like, oh my God, that's crazy. That's so cool. But it doesn't take long for it to kick in, where you realize well, this, quote unquote, and I'm using air quotes if you're not watching this on YouTube, this stud is actually kind of gross. And it's sort of this intrinsic, like, no, actually, this is getting gross. And this is talking, there are a lot of, I don't know if there's a lot of men who are gross, but there are men who are gross who will do and say whatever they want to have that opportunity to, spread their seed. And I would say too that there's an archetypal warning here that, if you're going to interact with chaos and potential with lies, you might be able to get something great at first. I mean, they're talking about seducing even a wise woman. And I mean, a wise woman is wonderful. But as we'll see, there are serious consequences for that. When you're going for something dishonestly and for something that you're not worthy of, there are definite consequences, and we'll see that later on in the poem.
Exactly. And I mean, again, here, it really, we can't emphasize this enough that this is the balancing of the whole poem here, right? Men lie too. And I mean, I think another thing here, another takeaway is just that this is obviously from the perspective of a man. And so it makes a lot of sense for a lot of this stuff to be directed at, his target, women. But then it also shows the self-awareness that men also do many of these things, but certainly from a different way. And I mean, it's a purely biological thing, right? To want to procreate. That's where all this kind of comes from. Even if today you kind of have, your playboys or whatever, your studs and whatever you want to call them, who seem to be out there just for a good time and to have sex and stuff like that. But really the underlying urge is to procreate. And well, I mean, I think a lot of those men would be disappointed if every time they had sex that actually resulted in a child. That would, they would not like the consequences there, because now they've got almost infinite responsibility there. But either way, this is just descriptive of behavior. And, both men and women lie to each other, within each other, like, men to men, women to women. It's people lie, like whatever. Let's just say that, first of all, people lie, but especially in relationships, right? And I mean, that's just this kind of whole jockeying for position. And I think figuring out if the other person is worthy. In a lot of ways, I think here, it's actually that men are trying to prop themselves up and make them look more useful to be picked, more worthy of being picked by the woman, and then the woman is trying to be deceitful or whatever. That's the wrong word to use here. Is being like, she is trying to keep the man from seeing everything that she's holding back while she's trying to get to know him. You know what I mean? Does that all make sense? Like, he's trying to look better, and then she's trying to evaluate him, something like that. And
for sure. And
that's really just descriptive of the idea that women actually are the ones who do the choosing, despite all appearances to the contrary, right? So
absolutely. I was just thinking, there's a movie that actually really displays how men tell the biggest lies to sleep with women, and it's an older movie, Wedding Crashers, and it's a pretty funny movie. I would recommend it if you're looking for something kind of light and funny to watch on a summer night kind of thing. But like they make these elaborate lies, and they have like scripted phrases that are eloquent and are supposed to evoke certain emotions in women, so that they can sleep with them at weddings. Like, this is basically like the Wedding Crasher stanza. Yeah. So, like, if you haven't seen the movie, and I think most people have, but yeah, check it out. It's you'll definitely see this particular stanza in that movie.
Yeah, never thought we'd be recommending the Wedding Crashers as something to tie into here, but that's funny.
Yeah, well, I just watched. My wife actually hadn't seen it.
Aha.
So we watched it last week, and I was reading this at the time. I was like, oh my goodness, this is right there.
Funny.
Yeah.
And the next stanza ties into this pretty well. So should we just...
let's move on.
Perfect. Okay, back to the poem. A man should speak eloquently and offer gifts to a woman whose love he wants. Praise the body of a beautiful woman. You will win her if you praise her.
So I think there might be two ways to look at this, and I'm going to look at it positively, because I think some could look at it and be like, oh, now they're just explaining what lies you need to tell to get a woman. But I'm actually going to say that, no, this is actually how you properly attract a woman and prove yourself worthy to her in that. So speak eloquently and offer gifts. I don't even just look at that as like offering like, shiny baubles and flowers and all that kind of stuff, but actually having something to offer. Whether that's, not whether, it should sort of be all of these things, sort of, protection, being able to provide for them, and speaking eloquently. I take that as being like good conversation, being able to mesh with them well, so that, you've got, witty repartee or whatever, just sort of that. You can tell with couples who have all these things because there's a certain flow to how they interact with each other, that, they're well matched. And yeah, just offering gifts, that's such an important part, because you don't want to be useless. And that's usually where the conflict comes from for a man, is that he doesn't necessarily realize how useless he is until he tries to prove himself worthy to a woman, and she rejects him because he is not worthy. And then he has to make that difficult decision of whether he recognizes his unworthiness, or if he's going to say, well, no, the world is unworthy for me. And then, praising the beauty of a woman, well, who doesn't want to be thought of as beautiful, right? So that's pretty clear. It also made me think there was a book that came out many years ago called The Game, and it was about how to pick up women. And even just saying pick up women is kind of ridiculous, because you're not physically lifting them. But one of the primary tactics is doing something called negging, where you say something like, oh, that's a great shirt. I've seen it on 6 other women tonight. You ladies must really love it, because no one wants to be just like everyone else, especially in dating and in attracting. So you say that, and the idea is that the woman that you've negged will now, and neg is short for negative, like giving a negative comment. And the idea is that now she thinks she's unworthy for you, and you've turned the tables, and she's going to try and build herself up and come after you to prove that she's worthy. And that is like, that might work for the night on an immature girl who's kind of unsure of herself, but it is absolutely no way to start anything that's going to have any meaning or any stability in it. And there's even ways you can like I grew up with 2 younger sisters, so my like natural language is teasing, but there's like a nice way to do it where it's fun, and you're playing with them, and I think that's the right way to look at it, is you're playing with the other person. You're asking them, do you want to play this courtship game? Whereas like just being a jerk, like that's no way, you're not going to build anything worthwhile starting with that.
Exactly. I think another example of that formula was something like, I wouldn't expect someone with your facial features to look so good in this dress, or something like that. Like,
wow.
Right? Yeah. This was just, something in the cultural sphere. This wasn't
Definitely.
something I ever tried to practice myself. I always thought it sounded silly, actually. Like why would this work,
Yeah, exactly. Like, why would this work? And then it's only with it. It seems to only work with people who are feeling already insecure about themselves. And why would you want to tear someone down, right? Like,
well, and then this is the exact opposite. This is to build someone up. This is to build this woman's self-worth up. And I mean, that's just going to make her more confident and more, enjoyable to be around on a really superficial level, but it could encourage her to pursue her hopes and dreams and be a more fulfilling partner, right? Like what's wrong with that? Like I know absolutely that's all that I would want for my wife is for her to pursue her hopes and dreams and aspirations, and for to be there to support her, right? And I mean,
absolutely, little
things like this. I mean, it's not superficial. I think everyone is self-conscious about their body in general. Like that's an across the board thing. It's just sort of men didn't really talk about that for a really long time,
sure.
Right? But,
and it's literally the reason why we wear clothes is because we're incredibly, when we started walking upright, we just became incredibly vulnerable. All of the parts of us that sustain our life is out in the open. And then all the parts that also like sustain our genetic line are out in the open. It's like, who wants to be judged on both of those things all the time? That's terrible.
Exactly. Clothes weren't just because it's chilly. Like,
no.
It's a big deal here. And no, I mean, this one, I like that you took the positive approach, and I will acknowledge the negative side of it, the cynical side, where it's like, okay, this is the way to do it. But at the same time, it's significantly better than these jokers who just go around trying to pick up women for one night, right? So,
for sure. One thing I will add, there can be sort of this weird, I don't know, dichotomy with praising beautiful women. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't, but it shouldn't be, well, it starts off with saying, speak eloquently and offer gifts. It means you have gifts to offer. It means you actually have something to offer them. Just telling a woman that she's beautiful can actually come across as kind of weak. And that's because that's all you have to offer is that praise and that.
Yeah, everyone's going to say that, right?
Everyone's going to say that. But when it comes from, if you yourself actually have value, if you've worked on yourself and you actually have something to offer, you're coming at it from a place of kind of equality, that your opinion actually means something. So I think that's the takeaway, is that make sure that you are in a position that your opinion actually carries weight, so that when you do tell a beautiful woman that she's beautiful, she can actually find value in it, rather than just like, well, okay, some other loser at the bar is trying to get with me. But yeah, no, make sure that what you're offering has value.
Pursue what is meaningful, not what is expedient.
Exactly. I've heard that before somewhere.
We've gone over an hour without a Jordan Peterson reference. So,
well, there we go. Is that a record? Probably.
It might be, yeah. Especially in the Havamal. Like, that's...
Oh, yeah.
Words of wisdom, they tend to overlap a little bit. But anyway, no, good couple of stanzas here. It brought the balance back into the equation here a little bit, but also at the same time, I think it's got a positive message, right?
I think so too.
Oh, good. Shall I move on?
Let's do it.
2 stanzas this time, 93 and 94. Back to the poem. No man should mock another for falling in love. Love sickness often strikes harder on a wise man than a fool. No man should mock another for falling in love. Love is strong enough to make a fool out of a man who was once wise. So
I guess I referred to this a little bit right at the beginning when I talked about how when you're in the presence of a beautiful woman, it is not uncommon for a man to become a little tongue-tied and get a little nervous and get a little skittish and all that kind of stuff. And I think we're seeing that it's hard enough to be experiencing that when you're in the presence of someone that you're quite interested in. So don't be a jerk and point it out or make fun of them for doing that. And similarly, if you want to sort of extrapolate it to archetypal symbolism, if someone is being brave enough to tackle and interact with chaos, that in itself is something. That in itself is something and worth something. So don't mock it, because one, you look like an idiot. And actually in the guest portion of the Havamal, they talk a little bit about this too, where, don't make fun of someone for falling in love, because one, it's bad form, but also this will be you one day. and you're vulnerable enough because you're putting who you are on the line and putting it out there on display. Like, you're vulnerable enough. You don't need your friends to sort of stab you in the back and make fun of you for it.
Exactly. I mean, it's a good goal, right? And it's something that everyone wants ultimately. So, I mean, making fun of someone for falling in love, like, what's the point? Like, to me, that reeks of jealousy and resentment, right? Like, you've got something that is socially desirable that I want. Oh, I'd best make fun of you and put you down a couple of pegs, right? Like, that's what that says to me. But it's a good goal. And I mean, I think saying that it could strike a wise man more hard than a fool, I mean, maybe that says it's more likely to fall for someone that you maybe intellectually in your head, might not necessarily be good for you, but, what say do you have in that matter? Or it's something like you're a wise man and therefore you're actually you're desperate to find love somehow if you're having trouble with it. I know certainly a lot of people that are very smart, very intelligent have trouble with love, and they have trouble, keeping a marriage together and things like that. Even really successful people. I think Elon Musk is a good example. I think he's been divorced a couple of times. I might be getting that wrong. I hope I'm not getting that wrong, but I think he's had trouble, right? And it's just something that is, it's something that is, really hard to deal with. So again, why make fun of someone if they actually find it, right? But then the flip side, the second stanza here is that it can make a fool out of a man who was once wise. It's got its downsides. It's blinding. It is that willful blindness. It almost is intentionally putting those blinders on yourself, because you're going to see the object of your affection. Rose-colored glasses is, I think, the word for it that we use. Everything they do is great, and you don't see any of their flaws. And it's only when it's too late. A lot of these days, it could be when you've knocked her up and you've already got a kid or something like that, or you've even gotten married or something like that. Being together for a really long time, that starts to fade, and then you start to see the real person, and and you can do irrational things for love too, right? It's something that can really throw you for a loop, and so this is both a warning and a positive thing. You should be shooting to fall in love and get married and find your partner. That's a goal universally across societies, but it can be hard.
Absolutely. And I think too, when you mentioned the rose-colored glasses, when you have that initial, I guess, lust for the other person, or that initial period of everything is wonderful, it generally lasts from about 90 days to 6 months. So 3 to 6 months. It can go anywhere from there. And the chemicals in your brain are in such a mess that you're pretty close to insane. And if you've ever been in love, I mean, when you first meet that person, you feel like you're on fire and all this. I actually hate the beginning, because I don't like that. It's thrilling and all that kind of stuff, but it's exhausting, and you're sometimes you start waiting for when the shoe's going to drop and the rose-colored glasses will come off, and it's all just it is very chaotic, because it's just, you're right there with potential and you don't know how it's going to turn out. It's very exciting, but also just exhausting and terrible. And even wise people have that, because it's brain chemicals. There's no amount of reading or even, I would say even actual life experience that will prevent you from having that rush of chemicals. So it could be the first time you fall in love. It could be the 10th time, or that you've met someone that you're really interested in. There's always going to be that rush and that excitement of new potential, and also the terror of new potential and all that kind of stuff. And no matter how wise you are, you are going to feel that, and you kind of have to deal with it.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I mean, this is just all saying tied together, first of all, don't make fun of somebody for falling in love, but also be cautious, and it can make a fool out of you, right? So it's
exactly,
the whole thing is just a good thing, very descriptive of, how things are socially, but also a warning against making fun of these people, because go off and do your thing. It's something we all strive for. So don't make fun of someone for getting that.
No, exactly.
Shall we continue?
Let's do it.
Back to the poem. Only you know what dwells in your heart when you are alone. But nothing is worse for a wise person than to have nothing to love.
So I looked at this stanza and I can see, I went a few ways with it. One was the wise person wanting someone to love and to marry, and the pain and the worst pain is because they're wise, they probably actually know what they're missing. Whereas if you actually haven't been in love before, you have an idea of what you're missing, but it's not, you don't actually have that like face to put to the person, or that real life experience. You don't have the feelings that you can, go back to and remember. Whereas if you've been in love before and now no longer have someone to love, well, you can actually remember the times that were awesome and feel their lack, which I think is knowing the lack, I would say is more painful than imagining what the lack feels like. But then also with wise people, I think they're always searching for something to learn about as well. So if they don't have something to kind of be obsessed about or to love, because they do say like nothing to love, and it's not no person to love. So I took it here as well. You always need that next project. And if you don't have it, that you just kind of stop, and it's actually very harmful because you stagnate. But you always need that next project, that next thing to kind of fall in love with and become a little bit obsessed with, so that you're interested in, you're passionate about, and you've just got something to do. Really is what it comes down to. Is you've got something to do with your life rather than just existing. Well,
I mean, on a meta level, I mean, this is pretty much how this podcast came about. Was I think both of us were looking for some kind of a new project to really dig our teeth into. I mean, I was just finishing school, and I mean, that was definitely, I felt that void. I go to my 9-to-5 job, and it's like, well, what am I doing with the rest of my time? Like, I was spending that studying and like really working hard to succeed, and now this is something that is fulfilling. I get to learn, I get to read, I get to learn about things. Like it's really positive. And I mean, so this show is an example of exactly what you're talking about.
Oh, definitely. I absolutely agree. I wouldn't necessarily say that we're wise, but, but no, it's definitely that idea that like you need something to love that you can move forward with, because you can't stagnate. It'll kill you.
Absolutely. And another thing I took away from this was that feelings in general can be very, very private. Knowing what is in your heart. I mean, I think this speaks to something like shame and some of the things that society would even consider shameful. This could be, being attracted to someone unattainable, like say your friend's wife or like the spouse of a family member or something like that. Like that is forbidden, but that's also something that in a lot of ways possibly you can't help, or you can't help with, at least without going to therapy or something like that, right? And I mean, I think that is just showing the things that can torture you if you leave that just within yourself and dwell on it. Like, I mean, I think that's just something that can eat away at a person. I'm not really speaking from experience on a lot of this stuff, but I mean, like, I think most people can agree with the idea of like, if the world knew all of the things that you thought about when you were alone, like, they would absolutely not want to have anything to do with you. And I think that's universal. So, I mean, I think that just speaks to something here, is that, when we're left alone and left without something positive to put your mind into, or someone attainable to love, or someone with you to love, then that's just going to lead to thoughts that could go in every which direction and be very negative and very damaging.
Absolutely. It makes me think of idle hands are the devil's plaything.
Aha. Yeah, good quote there.
Yeah, it's interesting that they put this in the love part, because I would say there is like an actual component of love to doing things that are interesting and not stagnating and just doing something with your life.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. It's definitely good to have a labor of love, something that you do that you're passionate about. Or obviously it's very good to fall in love with someone who reciprocates your feelings, and then, you build a family, and all those things are good.
For sure. Even, I was just saying, like, children, I don't have children myself yet, but I've got siblings that do and all that kind of stuff. And I mean, children eat up so much of your time that you might not have time to follow your hobbies and passions, but you do have this, little human that, ostensibly you love more than you've loved anything before. And you're going to do everything to make sure that, they survive and grow into a healthy, productive adult. So
yeah, exactly. Nothing but good things there.
No, nothing but good things.
Let's move on.
Let's do it.
Back to the poem. I experienced this when I waited among the reeds, and my lover did not come to me. That wise girl was my flesh and my heart, though I could not call her my own. So
we're going to get into, this is sort of the introduction to a story that Odin is about to tell us. And I find the image so interesting of him waiting in the reeds for this woman to come. And he's obviously quite enamored with her. She's a wise girl and was his flesh and heart. But he couldn't call her his own. So obviously they aren't together, or maybe she's with someone else, but he's feeling that pain of not having what he loves. And I do wonder if there is something about him waiting in the reeds. I'm not sure if there's a symbol there or if it's just something for the story, but I do just find that super interesting. Like, imagine the Allfather, hiding in like bushes, basically, like pining for his love to come and see him. Like, it's kind of sad. Like, it's kind of sad.
Exactly. No, I mean, like, the imagery there, it's really quite funny. And I mean, it just says anyone can be struck with this love sickness, whatever you want to call it. I mean, who hasn't had this where it's like they just see someone and you get struck? Like, this girl was my flesh and my heart, even if you have no idea about her, right? Like,
absolutely.
That's what this implies, I think. And then then you just get completely obsessive, and
it's kind of like, I don't know if you were old enough for this, for MSN Messenger.
I was.
Okay. And you used it. Okay. So there was a pretty common practice of, just going on Messenger and like kind of leaving it on or going invisible and waiting for your crush to come on so you could like go online and see if she'd talk to you first, or vice versa, see if they would talk to you first. And you'd see people like signing on repeatedly just to like make sure that they knew that, oh, they had to see me sign on, so why aren't they talking to me? And it's like exactly the same as waiting in the reeds, just waiting for the person to come by and be like, oh, like maybe I'll get to see them today. So things haven't changed. The reeds have become, online messaging.
Yeah, that's funny that's, well, we're dating ourselves sort of a little bit, because that's a while ago technology wise, but still that's just a funny example.
Yeah.
Funny to see that there's all this continuity, right? Should we get into the story itself?
I think so.
It's a short little thing, but it's got some substance to it. So this is 3 stanzas, 97 through 99. Back to the poem. I found Billing's daughter, fair as a sun ray, asleep on her bed. The life of a lord seemed as nothing to me, unless I could live with that woman. You should come back in the evening, Odin, she said, if you want to woo me. It is improper for others to know of such a scandal. I turned back, and I thought that I would win her. I imagined that I would win the woman's love and all her joy.
That scoundrel, Odin, going after a woman who is, seems to be with someone else. And, because she mentions that it would be a scandal if others knew about this potential relationship. And you can feel the nervousness and the desire that Odin has, and that it's kind of like when you're in, again, like high school, when you like someone and you're trying to navigate that. And not to give too much away, but I was thinking about this in the very first stanza that we read today as well. Because women are vulnerable to men in general, physically, they often have to rely on their, I'd say, feminine wiles or their cunning to protect themselves. And so they often, one way of doing that is to lie to a man. So you go out and you meet a woman and you ask for a number. She says, I've got a boyfriend. She's literally trying to cast you off with the idea that it's not that she doesn't like you or isn't interested in you. It's that societal norms are such that she's already got a boyfriend. So hopefully you respect, it's almost like you're going to respect the other man's, I don't want to say property isn't the right word, but position, I guess, position in her life. And because she knows that if she says, oh, actually, I just don't really like you in that way, you could fly off the handle and become violent and take advantage of your power. So there is that, perhaps that's what the Billing's daughter is doing right here, is that, maybe, or I guess it's not that she belongs to another one. Sorry, it's that she's under the protection of her father, and that's the rub, as it were, is that Odin isn't doing this properly.
Yeah, that's what it looks like to me, is that he hasn't gone through the proper channels, which would be, the proper courtship and everything like that. And back in the day, I think that would have meant, having to give gifts and give lots of approval and things like that, to unromantic, first of all, but also very much like, maybe it's trouble that Odin doesn't find worth doing, but I think it's more likely, if he really is falling for this woman, he would go to whatever lengths. I think it's more likely that he wouldn't be considered acceptable. And on the one hand, who wouldn't accept the Allfather? On the other hand, and we're going to see more of an example of this and possibly hit that right on the nose, but that would be more likely the scenario to me, is that the Allfather would have actually been considered an inappropriate match for this woman, or maybe it's known that Odin already has other women, something like that. And I mean, on the one hand here too, this is something to consider. Odin is enamored with someone. We don't know the continuity here. There's never any sort of continuity here, but it's generally known that Odin is married to Frigg. And so, I mean, he's also being a little bit infidelitous, right? So that's not great for him. But give him the benefit of the doubt. The continuity here isn't clear. I do like that you brought up, I've got a boyfriend thing. For all the modern criticism of having to use that tactic, I've certainly heard it specifically where it's like, women have to appeal to men's respect for other men, not just their respect for these women. But again, the point is, they're doing that as a tactic to manage men. not as a tactic to, not as something to belittle themselves or to take away any respect. They're using that as a tactic to manage men who could be violent. And again, that would all be on those men. But like, why wouldn't you take every precaution, right? As the more vulnerable person there.
Yeah, it's one of those cases where, like, should women have to sort of defer to the respect that men would have for another man? No. In an ideal world, that's not. They should just be able to say, you know what, I'm not interested, and that would be that. Everyone would walk away, relatively happy and, move on with their lives. However, that's not the world that we live in. So, yeah, these types of precautions do have to be taken. And like, I'd never fault a woman for saying that, because she wants to feel safe and has a right in society to be safe. And if this helps her with that, then, it's something that she's got to do as someone who, I think Margaret Atwood actually had a good quote about this, was that, if a man is worried that a woman might turn him down, and I'm paraphrasing here, but a man is worried that a woman might turn him down, but a woman is worried a man might kill her. And like, that is actually pretty accurate. That's not overstating it, because it does happen, unfortunately, it's fairly frequent. Like, it's not rare, unfortunately. I would say, like, Western civilization has done a decent job of mitigating that, but it still happens with regularity. And then other cultures that have different values, it happens far more regularly. But it is an actual real danger. So, yeah, women have to figure out ways to protect themselves. There's no two ways about it.
Exactly. And I mean, I would say that any man who has developed properly and has oriented themselves properly in the world is not going to do this.
Absolutely.
Isn't just going to be at the whims of their emotion sort of thing and is going to go fly off the handle and be violent towards a woman. That's not a man who has integrated themselves properly and is really acting like how a man should. But again, they're out there, and this is just taking a precaution. So, I mean, if the argument is that it's unfortunate that women have to do this and then blame it on the patriarchy sort of thing, I would say that they've got it wrong. Like, it's an intentional tactic to deal with the flaws in men, not this overbearing, overarching social construct that's encouraging this behavior. Like, this behavior is not encouraged. We aren't in a rape culture because rape is not glorified. Like, rape is one of the most reprehensible things that I can think of. It like,
absolutely,
it's basically right there at the top. And so, I mean, we're not glorifying that, and I wish it never happened. And so it's just like to cop this out to just this overarching, overbearing structure that's just oppressive is to ignore the practicality of it and ignore that it's a reality. It's an unfortunate reality, but it's a reality. What are we going to do about it, right? Like,
geez, I think with this one, we've probably pissed off women and men pretty equally on it, right? Like,
I would agree. So,
and honestly, I'm happy with that. If we can piss everyone off pretty equally, we're at least doing it right. I mean,
exactly. I had one more point here at the end here, just that Odin is optimistic when he's leaving. He's optimistic of this ending well.
Absolutely.
And I mean, I almost just want to leave that there, but I think that also just says, a guy would do anything for the opportunity. And if he leaves feeling like there's some kind of possibility, like,
absolutely.
That's a good situation for him. At least he thinks so, right?
Yeah, exactly. He's probably feeling pretty good right now. He's like, oh yeah, tonight's the night.
Let's move on and see how this ends. 2 stanzas this time, 100 and 101. Back to the poem. But when I came back that night, there was a good company of warriors awake and ready for me. With burning flames and torches held high, I was shown my miserable way out. And when morning came and I returned, everyone in the hall was sleeping. And then I found a watchdog tied to the bed of that good woman.
So even at the end, he's saying, found a watchdog tied to the bed of that good woman. So there is that, he's still recognizing her value. And, I just love the line, I was shown my miserable way out, because it would just be terrible. And rightfully so. Like, I'm not, I'm not showing sympathy. It's just like, no, that would be humiliating, because you thought you were on such a, you left on such a high, and you're like, okay, this is going to be great. And then you go and you find out she's actually kind of done the honorable thing and said, hey, this guy's coming around. I don't want to be around him, but, I don't have I need to be protected. And so then her relations, her father, I'm assuming, says, well, of course I'd protect you. You're my daughter. And I do think too that if we expand it to the archetypes and sort of order and chaos, that if you go after something that you don't deserve, this is a very likely outcome, that the chaos and the potential will sort of come after you, and you'll there's a phrase for it, you've bitten off more than you can chew. It's sort of that idea that you're not prepared for this at all, and that you're completely overwhelmed by it and have to retreat. And then you can try and sneak back and be like, oh, maybe I'll be sneaky and do it this way, and I'd say being too clever by half. And then they have the guard dog there that you still can't get by because it'll bark and wake everything up and or bite you. So, yeah.
No, exactly. I mean, first of all, Odin was not successful here, which again is just something to say. Even the Allfather is not always successful. So just bear that in mind if you're ever feeling down or like a failure or something like that. Even the top god in the dominance hierarchy has his unsuccessful moments, and it's a little bit funny that it seems to be in cases of love where he is unsuccessful. At least there's one story where he's unsuccessful, right? But then, to me, I took this as a symbolic rejection. First, she sort of tried to placate him and sort of brush him off sort of thing. But then he comes back around, and then, okay, here's the actual rejection. But if you were imagining that sort of situation in the street, something like that, or in a bar, I think the equivalent here is that either she went and got the bouncer or something like that, or male friends to protect her, or male relatives, right, to protect her. And this is all just saying, it's hinting at that vulnerability again. Unfortunately, women do need that protection from the men in their lives because they are physically weaker than men. And I mean, again, take this as something unfortunate, take it as reality. I take it as reality, but women require protection from the potential negative reactions of men here. And so if she were actually going to reject him, or the father was going to reject him for being unworthy, no matter what, that's the kind of the deal here. This just speaks to the need to enforce that through other men. And I mean, no matter what the implications of that are on a cosmic level, on a societal level these days, it seems to be the reality.
Absolutely. I was thinking too, it reminded me a little bit of dominance hierarchies where the dominant person is tyrannical. And he's, Odin, I would say, is acting tyrannically. He's not going through the proper things. He's just trying to impose his will on the situation. And yes, he's the Allfather, and so he's the alpha. But when you have a good company of warriors who, they aren't Allfathers themselves, but they're still able to fend him off. And that's what happens with chimps, is that the ones that are a little lower on the rung will gang up on the alpha and kill him. And there's nothing the alpha can do. In all of his alphaness, it doesn't matter when you're up against a group. So I think there's a little bit of that too, where against tyranny, and yeah, I would absolutely say that Odin is acting a little tyrannical here, and maybe with a little bit of toxic masculinity even. If you have good men to stand up against it, it has to retreat.
Right, exactly. And I mean, I think that just says the societal protections that are put around women, and that's, I think, to enforce that it's only if she chooses. These days, I think that's what that is for sure. I mean, unfortunately, back in the day, I keep saying that, it was probably a reality that arranged marriages were a thing, and it was like with the approval of her father or her family and the whole society and everything like that. But, these days, I think the protections that we put around that are so that it's the woman doing the choosing and being able to do that freely and not getting raped. I mean, the societies where a woman can get raped by a man and then she's forced to marry him, I mean, honestly, that's reprehensible. I call that reprehensible. And I do appreciate that we put those societal protections around women who are more vulnerable and don't force women to go through that. And yeah, I mean, maybe it's not PC to condemn another culture like that, but I don't see any value in anything that forces anyone to do anything, but especially to force a woman to marry a man who raped her. That's terrible.
Yeah, I have no problem condemning that practice at all. It's awful. There's no other way to talk about it. And there is something I want to make clear, that we've been talking a lot about how vulnerable women are. I really don't want to come across as we're saying like women are weak or less than men, and some the man has to rush to the protection. That's not it at all. It's just there are differences between men and women, and physiology being one of the main ones. And because of the physiological difference, men don't have to play the game. Really, they can take shortcuts, and it's when they take shortcuts that it ends up hurting women, because they don't have the physiology to meet, withstand, or overcome the shortcuts that some men are willing to take. So again, this isn't a thing where women are damsels in distress or weak or anything like that. It's just in this one instance of physiology and the ability to be violent, men have the upper hand, and so it's a real thing, because a man could kill a woman, like physically barehanded kind of thing, whereas it would be much more unlikely for a woman to do that. In addition to, men having testosterone, which is kind of this wild card of, it does make men more volatile. So there is,
ironically,
yeah. So
for all the symbolism we're talking about here, that should just emphasize this is not a hard and fast thing,
no.
Right? So for all the symbolism that sort of says feminine is chaos, well, men have testosterone, and yeah, that makes men much more volatile. So that's just to illustrate how this is not a black and white line or something that applies everywhere across the board. So
yeah. So, and I'm just putting that in there because we're talking a lot about the vulnerability of women, but I don't want it to come across at all that we think women are weak or anything at all like that. It's just in that, like, this is actually just a physical reality that we have to manage.
I forget where I heard this. My guess is it was Jocko, but I forget exactly where I heard this, so I can't attribute this correctly. But I think wherever I heard this, it was someone saying that they were rolling jujitsu with a woman, like a black belt or something like that. But this was like with a guy, like a big guy who was like 250 pounds and muscular, not like a 250 pounds like me sort of thing, like 250 pounds and muscular versus like a 130 pound woman. And he was just like, even though she is like so much more skilled, like if I just went all in with all my strength, like I would just crush her. And that's not to say that women shouldn't do martial arts or anything like that either, because that can be some very, very, very good tools to give the upper hand in a life or death situation where, possibly this raging testosterone maniac guy you meet on the street you know, in a lot of situations, I would say actually it's probable that they wouldn't have formal martial arts training because martial arts is very good at building discipline and building self-control and all these other good things. But, you know, maybe a woman could get the upper hand in a life or death situation like that by doing this. But if it's two people who are trained well in jiu-jitsu and one happens to be twice the size of the other, that's not a contest for the most part.
No, and it's like, I always think of like sprinting in the Olympics and how in the women's event, the numbers that they pull in at the Olympics. So this is the premier sprinters in the world. Their times can be beaten by high school boys, and it's just like a fact of the physiological differences. So sexual dimorphism, I think.
Wasn't it also like number 75 or something ranked male tennis player could beat Serena Williams and like actually did something like that? I forget what exactly the circumstances were of this, but it was.
Well, I know Serena Williams was asked about, you know, how can you be, you know, 76th or whatever, and she's like, well, there's no way I could beat number 75 and whoever that was. And I mean, Serena Williams is an amazing tennis player. But she was just like, yeah, there's no way I could beat that because there is a physiological reality that
the men have more upper body strength, can hit harder, and that's just it.
That's just it.
Again, I mean, we're going through all this just so you don't get the wrong idea, but you know, it has to be said in this society, unfortunately. So, but the end of the story is Odin gets marched out of there and does not get his goal of this lovely woman, and the moral of the story might be that he did not go through the proper channels here and got what he deserved. So that's just, in general, something to keep in mind.
Absolutely.
Shall we move on?
Let's do it.
Back to the poem, stanza 102. There's many a good woman, if you get to know her, who will change her mind about a man. I learned that when I tried to seduce a wise woman. That lady showed me every kind of shame, and I gained no wife for my trouble.
I like that one because it shows what a powerful, self-possessed woman can do to a man who thinks he's kind of all that, and starts doing some ridiculous things and just, showed me every kind of shame. It's just brilliant. And of course he gained no wife for his trouble. I actually wasn't sure what to make of, there's many a good woman, if you get to know her, who'll change her mind about a man. If that was referring to that the more you get to know her, at first she'll think you're kind of cool, but then sees you for the real you and is like, you're garbage. Or if, you could start off as, and I've seen many relationships that start off like this, where, a man and a woman meet each other. They don't actually really hit it off. They kind of don't like each other. But then after a while, they kind of come around and actually see the other person for who they really are, and become quite enamored with each other and get married and have kids and live quite happily ever after. But it often starts, I've heard a lot of stories of meeting where it's like, I actually didn't like this person at all. And like, yeah, me neither. They annoyed the crap out of me. And then, well, crap, like had to spend some time with them, or they were always in the friend group and actually really grew to really like them. And then, yeah, so I actually wasn't sure which way it was going, because it could go either way. Maybe, got to know Odin and found that he was kind of a scoundrel, which would be right, or that, I'm assuming, because we don't hear about it again, but I'm assuming we don't hear, it's not the more positive one where they, meet each other and hate each other at first, but then it works out.
Well, he gained no wife for his trouble, so probably the latter. On this one, I went in that direction where it was like if a woman sees you for your worthless self, then maybe you aren't worthy anymore, right? I definitely went in that direction. This reminded me of just, what we talked about earlier with the awakening of consciousness in men by women, where it's like you see your self-vulnerability, showing every kind of shame. To me, that is like making you self-conscious. It's the Adam and Eve story. It's like Eve ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and then she could see Adam in all his worthlessness and made him self-conscious, and then he put on clothes, right? Like it's really quite something. And I mean, that's where I took this stanza here. And I mean, it also just says that women can change their mind, which they absolutely have the right to do, first of all. But upon getting to know someone on a deeper level, I mean, that's when you would decide yes or no. And I think there's nothing wrong with that at all.
No, absolutely. I totally agree. And I love that you went like the Adam and Eve route. I absolutely see that. I think that's a great observation there.
Yeah. Interesting stanza here. I mean, it's fairly self-contained, but I think it just describes in general, like, I mean, it says he tried to seduce a wise woman. Like, a wise woman can see through the games you play.
Absolutely.
For sure. So, shall we move on?
Let's do it.
Back to the poem. If you want to be very wise, be happy at home and cheerful with a guest. Cultivate wisdom, a good memory, and eloquence, and speak kind words often. You'll be called a fool if you can't say much. That's the mark of the unwise.
So this is basically the thesis to the Havamal, like in its totality. Like, you don't really need to read anything else other than this. I think you were saying earlier before we started recording that stanzas, what is it, 77?
Yeah, 76 and 77.
Yeah,
76, these
77.
two and this one. Yeah.
So that, like, the cattle die, the kinsman dies. So basically what you need to know is you're going to die, and your reputation will be what lives on after you. And here's how you get a good reputation. And that's it. Like, it just sums it. When I read it and found it sort of like in the middle of the Havamal, it's like, man, this is exactly what the Havamal is. It perfectly encapsulates it. So yeah, we've basically had episodes on being cheerful with a guest and cultivating wisdom so that you're able to speak eloquently, because you don't want people to think that you're unwise. And how would you be seen as unwise? Is, well, you don't really have anything of value to say. So no, this is really all you need for a good, like, literally for a good life. All you need.
Exactly. No, I was blown away when I saw this. First of all, like, right when I started reading it, I was like, wow, this is like a throwback to the earlier section. But then it's like, wow, this is like bang on. This is everything. This is hospitality. This is growing wisdom, and then, back earlier, it would be like implying growing wisdom through listening, through humility, through speaking with wise people. If you can't say much, that's a mark of the unwise. Like, yeah, exactly. This just sums it all up. Be happy, have a good home, have a good place that you can call your own, but also interact with the unknown, have hospitality, have guests in. This is a really good stanza. This is like, it's perfect. It ties it all together, and it's just smack dab in the middle of his love poem.
Yeah. No, it's great. And this is how you'd become worthy of a woman. So
right. Oh yeah. That's a fantastic point there too. Yeah.
So yeah, if you don't take anything else away from any of our episodes, like, take stanza 103 from the Havamal, and it'll be fine. You'll do good.
Couldn't agree more. And go back to the first 3 episodes if you want really more of this in detail, because, like, honestly, I don't have more to say about this without basically rehashing the entire first 3 episodes on the Havamal. So
I'm in the same boat. It'd just be rehashing. Yeah.
So check those out. This is a great stanza. And let's move on.
Let's move on.
Stanza 104. Back to the poem. I visited an old giant, and now I've returned. I didn't stay silent there. I spoke many words in support of my cause at Sutung's Hall.
So this is, well, one, it's a bit of a departure from what we've been talking about because we're starting, it's not a new poem, but it's a new story within the poem. And it's a very famous story of Odin getting the Mead of Poetry. And so, just to give some context, I visited an old giant, and now I've returned. Well, an old giant, the word for old giant is actually Sutung. So that is, old giant is actually sort of the proper name of the giant that whose hall he's visiting. And when he talks about he didn't stay silent there and spoke many words in support of his cause, well, in this poem, we don't know, people, if we're going through this as letting the stories unfold as if we haven't read them before or anything like that. We don't really know what Odin's mission is yet, but we know that he spoke many words. So we know that obviously there's wisdom there because he is speaking, and that when he's dealing with a giant, he's dealing with the unknown. So he's gone into sort of the heart of the unknown and is pleading his case and is interacting with the potential and the chaos there with his wisdom and all of his abilities. And I'm trying to think if there's something else I was going to say about that, but just is really just setting up, this is what I was going to say, that chances are if someone back then was hearing the Havamal, they would have actually known the story, and it's already known. They would know exactly what story they're referencing. So even though we're kind of treating it as we're not going to we don't talk about things that are ahead in the poem too much, just for your own information, that they would already know what the story that is about to be told was, and all the details about it. It was known knowledge.
Right, definitely. And in this case, I took that as the connotation here is that Odin spoke many words in support of his cause, but it's not necessarily going to be good for him. I don't think that's a spoiler, but that's just, what that's implying, I think, is that if you support your cause too much and too heavily, if it's just going to fall on deaf ears on a group of people that isn't hearing it, that's just going to come off worse for you in the end. And I think this is just sort of a warning, a bit of caution to maybe hold back some of that. Certainly, there's a time and a place to. There's a time and a place to make this the hill you die on, to sort of Frankenstein some different phrases there. But yeah, unless it really is your hill to die on, like maybe tone yourself down a little bit and wisely survive the situation. We've definitely seen that where plenty of wisdom is better than gold or money in an unknown place, right? And I mean, this would be the case here where, he's got to use his wisdom and maybe going full-throated in support of his cause isn't going to be the best thing. That's just, planting that seed there. And then, but just above, it was like, if you can't say much, that's the mark of the unwise. So again, here, it's like, he didn't stay silent. So, I mean, at least he's got that going for him. But I think the implication is that he might say too much. For sure.
And actually, just a few stanzas ago, and in a previous episode, we learned about if you are wise, not being too wise and not saying too much to show how wise you are, like keeping it, staying humble, but also keeping all of your power sort of kind of hidden so that your opponents can't sort of sum you up right away.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And I did actually find a definition for Sutung's name that was a little bit different.
Oh, interesting.
And it's heavy with drink.
Oh, interesting.
or heavy with broth. I think I'm recognizing tongue as heavy. I might be getting that wrong, but yeah, heavy with drink. And he's the keeper of the Mead of Poetry. And I think we can just give a little bit of background.
For sure.
So he mixed the blood of Kvasir, who was a great poet of the gods, who was killed by a pair of dwarfs. This entire story we'll go into at another time, probably when we hit the Prose Edda. But the blood of Kvasir was theoretically the most inspirational stuff out there that you could possibly come across here. And then Suttung mixed it with honey to create the Mead of Poetry. I think I originally read somewhere that this was how mead was made in general, but I think I've also read versions where it's like specifically this is how the Mead of Poetry was made. So not all mead is the Mead of Poetry, but I think all mead has the potential to be the Mead of Poetry, maybe something like that. Blood of Kvasir is sort of a shorthand for alcohol as well. It's like a kenning for alcohol. I believe that's correct, that it is a kenning for alcohol specifically. And so alcohol made from honey is mead. Then you get Mead of Poetry. So,
and I think Kvasir, at least in the Voluspa, he was the like the ambassador, the emissary that the Aesir sent to the Vanir first, and then he was killed. I could be wrong on that. I might be.
Yeah, I'm not going to. I didn't go confirm those details myself. So
neither did I. That might be it. I might be misremembering it, but
either way, we'll hit this story in a little more detail when we get to the Prose Edda, which I think you're probably aware by now that that's going to take us a little while, but we'll get there.
We'll get there.
Exactly. So, shall we move on into the story a little bit more?
For sure.
Okay, back to the poem. Gunnlod, his daughter, gave me a drink of his precious mead while I sat on a golden chair. I would later give her a bad repayment for her trusting mind, for her troubled mind.
Well, were we reading more? I can't remember.
No.
Okay, perfect. It just seems Odin's being kind of a jerk in this, in his love poem. So, Gunnlod the daughter, and Gunnlod means battle invitation. At least that's what I got for it. And I think that's fascinating because when you are a younger man and you are drinking, women are often a battle invitation. And it's funny because she's offering alcohol. So the connection between women, alcohol, and fighting is like really made there. And again, we're not blaming women for causing fights, but just men do fight over women. And especially when alcohol is involved and the inhibitions are a little lower. And yeah. So I think they got her name exactly right. And of course, well, I'll mention the name. I think we get the name of the mead in a few stanzas, but I'll mention it here just because there's a sort of important, there's an important connection I want to make. It's Othririr, and the translation for it is either like the stir of inspiration or like the stir of fury. And Odin, of course, is the god of inspiration and fury, and he only drinks this mead for sustenance. So that's what he's known for. So I love that it is a woman, so the feminine, giving him this inspiration and this fury in the form of a drink. It's very archetypally, I would say, like correct that getting this, getting it from the feminine and the chaos and the potential. So,
well, and I think Othririr is the same root. The OTH in Othririr would actually be an O and a D with a line through it. That's in modern Icelandic and in Old Norse. And in Old Norse, Odin was Odin. And so he's got the same root word with this inspiration. That's what his name actually means, it's something to do with with inspiration. That's the root of his name. And so it's the same, Odrorir would be the same exact root for inspiration as is in Odin's name. So the stirrer of inspiration, and then he's related to it. Yeah, it's good stuff. And I got the exact same definition as you there, and with Gunnlod as well. But, a little bit about her, like, if she's the guardian here of this Mead of Poetry, like, unfortunately, like, how hard would that be for her if she's got people trying to seduce her, but it's actually just for the thing that she's guarding or the stuff that she has, right? Like, how real is that too? Or it's like, you're going after someone for their wealth or for the things that they have or something like that, and not actually for them, not for the love of them. And then, possibly to be repaid badly for that, to be betrayed. Like, that's sad. That's hard. I mean, she was trusting, troubled, obviously wanted some love herself. And, she gave Odin a drink of this mead, and that's all that he really wanted. So, again, not painting Odin in a great light here, and also, a little bit of a tragic figure kind of on her part. So,
definitely, I would definitely agree with that. Yeah, Odin's not showing up too well in this.
The gods in general often don't. So, as we've seen. So, shall we keep going?
Yeah, let's keep going.
2 stanzas here, 106 and 107. Back to the poem. Giants' dwellings were over and under me. I used Rati's tusk to burrow out and gnaw away the rock. In this way, I got out with my head. I made good use of the disguise I used. Few things are too difficult for the wise. Now Odrorir is rescued from the clutches of the giants.
So it's interesting because they don't really mention it, but Suttung's Hall and where Gunnlod is, it's basically in a mountain. And to get inside, Odin has to sort of drill a hole in it with Rati's tusk. And it's basically an auger. And I believe it's sort of named after the squirrel, Ratatosk, and his teeth and that kind of thing. But we're just seeing sort of the lengths that Odin has gone to get Odrorir. And it's kind of jerky, like he's stolen it. He's used his wisdom to steal it, and he's rescued it from the clutches of the giants. So he's rescued it from the grasp of chaos and potential and all that kind of thing. And I wonder if part of Odin being a jerk in a lot of these situations is the idea that sometimes to get things done, you yourself have to be kind of a jerk or monstrous. And that, because it's a very good thing that he's gotten this mead that, it's sort of, I would say, distilled chaos and potential that, it's easily digestible. You're not just being thrown into it. It's something that you can sip from and gain the benefits of, inspiration and, well, even the benefits of fury. You might get inspired and then go work on something really hard or something like that. Or, see a beautiful woman be inspired by her and then fight some other guy for it. So, there's always that double-edged sword aspect to it. But I do think we're seeing Odin sort of not being useless. I guess this is the charitable way of looking at it, that yes, he's being a jerk, but maybe he has to be a jerk to be able to deal with the chaos and get what's needed from it to, be beneficial for his people and his tribe.
Exactly. I mean, he's definitely an ends justify the means kind of person, and that person, God, but this story illustrates it. He's going to these great lengths. He is seducing a woman. And I mean, he's getting a great reward out of it. But I mean, we'll see after this that, there might be some consequences. I do want to add another detail that the only way he got into this was that he turned into a snake, which is just all the way. Like, first of all, nail on the head symbolically, right? Like, that's just, he's embracing chaos to the fullest possible extent. And that's the only way to gain access to this stuff. That is one interpretation here, is that you have to embrace the negative side and the chaotic side. And I do not mean to imply that chaos is negative here. I'm implying that his actions were possibly negative while embracing chaos, just to be precise there. But no, that's the reward, though, is this mead of poetry, this distilled inspiration. So to him, that's worth this trouble. And I mean, he's rescuing it from the giants, which we have talked about how it's sort of a by name or a by symbol for chaos in general, but also for the unknown. I think that distinction is important because, maybe he's doing this noble pursuit and rescuing it from chaos, but also he could just be stealing this stuff from a rival tribe, and that's a lot less noble.
And I could see either one being sort of factually correct, or how this story was understood. It made me think too of I think there's kind of a play here on the idea of rescuing the maiden from the dragon, but it's kind of a weird one, because Odin is becoming the serpent, which is usually the symbol of the dragon, that kind of thing. And he's kind of taking from the maiden, like the Mead of Poetry, the prize. And typically the story is the hero goes, kills the dragon, rescues the maiden, and attains the gold, which might just be the love of the maiden and, her fertility and that kind of thing, her love and marriage. But you kind of have, I'm seeing it as kind of a mishmash of, like, you've got Odin as the dragon, stealing her prize and then escaping. Like, he's just not a hero here. Like, he is the bad guy here.
Exactly. And I think that is the ultimate point here. Like, he's gone and done bad things in order to get this goal. And I mean, you can debate ends justify the means here. And I think it's implying both, sort of. It's implying that, yes, the ends justify the means, but there is some consequences to it, which we will see. And maybe those consequences, or not being the hero, not being honorable, maybe that is not worth it. Maybe that is the takeaway. But we'll have to see how this all plays out. So we'll move on.
I think so.
Stanza 108. Back to the poem. I doubt I could have escaped Jotunheim if I hadn't used Gunnlod, the good woman who rested in my arms.
Well, isn't that just wonderful? He recognizes, what, he is totally conscious of what he has done. That he used a good woman, seduced her, got her to the point where she trusted him and would lay in her arms in an amorous situation. And he could not have escaped Jotunheim, or the unknown, if he hadn't done that. Yeah, I'm not sure there's actually like a positive upswing to it. It's just, this is what he had to do to escape the unknown with the prize.
Right. Like, on the one hand, I mean, doing what he had to do, right? But at what cost? I mean, I'm assuming the combination here is something like either she helped him escape, because, I mean, that's sort of one of those things, like, you got your lover sort of thing. What wouldn't you do from them? We've already touched on how love can make you do irrational things, right? Or he used her as a hostage. That's equally possible, right? Like,
for sure.
Hey, I've got Gunnlod, like, I've got the Mead of Poetry, but better let me go with the Mead of Poetry or I'll kill her. Like, that's, either one is possible as far as I'm concerned. I don't know if that detail gets ironed out in the Prose Edda or not, but
I'm trying to remember.
I don't think it did. I don't think that detail got resolved. But yeah, either way, not coming off great, and certainly not coming off as a nice person and a good possible mate.
Definitely not. And I think there is this idea that if you deal with chaos and the unknown, you do have to be dangerous yourself because it's dangerous, and you do have to be able to put up a fight and not be useless. But I do have to wonder if this is like just beyond that, where because it's not the hero that goes to slay the dragon is also dangerous and not useless, and is able to take on the forces of the unknown and in some cases evil. But I don't think we're at that level where, Odin wasn't fighting a dragon. He was seducing a woman and tricking her in order to get what he wanted. In some ways, it's kind of the end result of the maybe pain or suffering that he felt from the women that he couldn't attain. And now it's like, well, now I can attain women, and I'm just going to be a jerk to all of them because I have that power within me now. It almost strikes me as a little bit of like Cain, where he's I don't know if there's vengeance here. They don't mention it, but I could see that. I could see that aspect of it being there, that, well, I'm going to hurt these women who hurt me. And it's not a nice look. Definitely not a nice look. And I mean, yeah, again here, I mean, it's the only way he could get out of this situation. But I mean, I think that's, maybe that's saying don't get into situations where this is the only way out, right? At the end of the day, I mean, self-preservation, I mean, that's on the one hand, but on the other, there's also maintaining your honor and maintaining your status in society. And maybe we should move on and... Yeah, let's see what happens. Back to the poem, stanza 109. The next day, the frost giants came to ask news about Odin in Odin's hall. They inquired about that evildoer, whether he was among the gods or whether Suttung had killed him. So it looks like Odin's gone a little AWOL. He's hiding. And it's great because the frost giants go directly to Odin's hall. So it means like he's not safe. And he's not safe from the consequences. And it reminds me of, I guess this will be the second time we directly mention Jordan Peterson, but he often talks about you can't get away with anything. And this is definitely Odin not getting away with it because the frost giants are in his hall, in his home, the place where he has the most power. And they've come directly to him to see if he's around, and they're calling him an evildoer. They're ready to kill him. They're ready to bring him to justice. This is no joke. No, it's not. And I mean, it's really just saying that acting in this way, in this deceptive way, well, I mean, on the one hand, it's like, don't let people figure out who you are. And I mean, that's highly cynical and not the real message here, but it's like doing this, being deceptive, it's just going to come back to you. You're not going to escape the consequences. And I mean, I don't know. On the one hand, I sort of see this with some decorum. It's like the frost giants came and everything. I mean, what could they do? But it really is just, he is in trouble and the whole world knows it. And he got this great thing, but at what cost, right? And it seems like it's at the cost of endangering himself, all the people around him, and possibly his reputation, right? Like that's not a good thing, because your reputation's what is going to live on with you after you die, right? So as we've seen, and so no, like I would say it was not worth it to just do this with ends justifying the means here. No, I would agree. It even when you like expand it beyond sort of interpersonal relationships and try and find like the symbolism in it, even though the symbolism isn't like it isn't good. It's not uplifting or positive. It's like, no, you did a bad thing and now you're gonna have to pay for it. Like, yeah.
Should we finish this off?
I think so.
This will be our last stanza of this section, finishing off Odin's love poem. Stanza 110. Back to the poem. I believe that Odin swore an oath to them, but who can trust Odin? He left Suttung deceived in his own home, and he left Gunnlod weeping.
So, Odin, they're basically calling Odin an oath breaker, which is a big deal. That's, I don't know, would you die for that?
You wouldn't necessarily die for that, but your reputation is ruined.
Ruined and forever. You don't recover from that. And I don't know if they'd even outlaw you, but you would just be, they would basically allow you to exist. If they didn't outlaw you, they'd basically allow you to exist, and like you'd have no social capital. You wouldn't be able to interact with people. Everyone would know that you were an oath breaker and that you can't be trusted. It's one of the worst things that you could be. And this is the Allfather. Like, I don't even know what to make of that. Like, in terms of like archetypal symbolism, other than perhaps it's this idea that life is unfair and that bad things happen to good people, and that in this case it's the Allfather doing these bad things to good people, because we actually don't see anything that Suttung or Gunnlod did that was incorrect. They, for all intents and purposes, I mean, Gunnlod was just looking for love, and she was supposed to protect this Mead of Poetry, but she wasn't doing anything to hurt anyone else.
Right. I mean, there's some backstory, but I think the idea is they created this Mead of Poetry, so that's theirs by rights. And I mean, Odin goes and takes it. I mean, what I get here is just self-awareness that actions have consequences. Like, yeah, like that's what I take away from this on a cosmic level, that, if you mess up and you have mistakes and everything like that, and you go too far, what are you going to be left with? Like, you're an oath breaker. Like, I think that is what that says, is that there are consequences to your actions, and sometimes grievous actions have grievous consequences, as they should too. Like, I think that is also what it's saying. Like, he swore an oath, went back on it, so now who can trust Odin? That's the consequence. The consequence is you can no longer be trusted ever. And I mean, maybe Odin didn't go into any of this with the intention of having this happen, but still, he's very much an ends justify the means kind of guy. And I think the means did not justify the ends this time.
No, I would agree. Yeah, it looks like he paid a very heavy price for this, that he may not necessarily have had to do it this particular way. There might have been, I don't know, it just seems, it just seems like there's a level of, well, one, like there's a level of cruelty to it, and having, just doing what is expedient rather than, what's the other one? Meaningful. So,
yeah. No, and I mean, just to tie this all back in, this is like how easily you can lose your reputation, right? And again, that's all you have. At least in the Havamal, that's really what it says. That's what you have. That's what you die with. And this is implying that Odin is going to die with the reputation of an oath breaker. And I mean, maybe that's not how we know him through his stories, because he's done some other things, but maybe this is the story we should be remembering Odin by. And maybe this is also a warning to anyone who would seek to emulate Odin as this great figure, that he also did some really terrible things and had some really, really well-deserved consequences. And so this self-awareness from him as well is also really interesting, because he is still nominally the author of this poem. And he's saying, who can trust Odin? Even going to the third person is almost humorous. It's like, who can trust Odin? And it's like, I almost see that as like the image in my head is something like he's just sitting there. Who can trust Odin? And he's just shaking his head and like I don't know. Like I've just got a particular image when I see how this is presented, and it's very negative and it's very self-aware, and it's like, yeah, actions have consequences, and your reputation is what you make of it. And Odin did not make a permanent, good, lasting image of his reputation.
It's almost a warning that, yeah, it's not, because it's definitely not glorified. It would be a warning to the people hearing this that, okay, well, we just did all the parts where, you have to be honorable and treat guests well and all that kind of thing. And then when we get to love, well, it gets a little trickier, but you still need to do that. And then if you don't do that, well, you're an oath breaker.
Odin was absolutely breaking hospitality through all this.
Sure.
That's what they're specifically saying here. Like he deceived Suttung in his own home. Like that is specifically hospitality that he is encroaching upon. Because again, we've gone into how it's a responsibility of the host and the guest to maintain hospitality. And if either one breaks it, that's grounds for, serious societal pressure and whatever you want to call it, condemnation would even be the case. Like guest gets thrown out, but if the host is guilty of not being hospitable, like when we were in Grimnismal, we got into how like it was a serious accusation to say that King Geiroth was not hospitable. Odin had to go all the way to investigate that because that's just such a serious claim, right? And I mean, that's just to say here, Odin was breaking his own rules. All the things that he has said in the Havamal thus far, he's broken them. And that's why the Havamal is so powerful to me, because it's like, yeah, I've made some mistakes. Here's how you avoid them. Here's how you can live and not make the mistakes that I have.
Definitely. And something I love about the love poem portion of it in particular is that it starts off with saying, women lie and they're untrustworthy. And then he says a little bit like, men lie too. But then we just get his own personal examples spelled out in explicitly why men are terrible, like the things that men can do that are terrible. And I would actually say men get like the worst, like the short end, not the short end of the stick, because that makes it sound unfair, but they get the examples like really just thrown out there in your face of, women can be deceitful and all that kind of stuff. But here, let me show you exactly what I did as a man to get what I wanted and how I lied and stole and cheated. And yeah, like it definitely, like if there's an accusation of sexism to be made, I would say, well, like this is what I'd point to. It'd be like, you just have him saying like, yeah, you can't trust women sometimes. But then you have all of these examples, like real examples of the garbage that men are doing. So, yeah.
Exactly. It just ties this whole thing back together in the context of this love poem. It really solidifies exactly the message that both men and women can lie, but men can do some very terrible things. And again, that self-awareness is a really positive thing here at the end, because it's like all of this that I can say about, women being deceitful and untrustworthy and stuff. Well, who am I to say anything about that? Who am I to criticize that? Because, here's what I've done. And you can extend that to anyone, really, anyone's negative interactions in love and in life. Maybe in some ways it's like, who's to criticize anyone, because everyone's done some negative things, right? So it's, yeah. And maybe just to tie this back into the love section as well, like this is an example of love gone wrong.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Let's make that clear. This is love gone wrong.
This is not successful. This is not gaining a successful and fruitful partnership and family. This is just Odin being a jerk. And it's not the only time he does it, but this is one of his most egregious examples, and he gains the reputation of an oathbreaker for it. So, and
in the prose that they go into more detail about like just how bad the stuff he did was. So yeah, once we get there, you'll see like there's definitely, he takes responsibility here, but like you actually get to see all the little things he did that were not so great. Yeah,
exactly. So again, this is Odin. This is wisdom. This is what happens when you let your reputation crumble, right? So I don't know. I don't have anything more on this.
No, that's good for me too. I think I've exhausted what I had to say.
Me too. So that closes the book on Odin's love poem. We still have 2 other poems in the Havamal, 2 other sort of sub-poems in the Havamal. So that's 2 more episodes, just so, we got way more to look forward to here with the Havamal. But I think that does it for this episode here. So I think we can just finish off with our usual acknowledgements. Again, many thanks to Jackson Crawford and Hackett Publishing for letting us use his translation of the Poetic Edda. As usual, link down to purchase the book on Amazon will be below in the description and in the podcast notes. And check out his YouTube channel as well. Great source of information. We would be remiss if we didn't mention Dr. Jordan Peterson, the inspiration for this show. Absolutely. We wouldn't have done that without his great work, especially his university lecture series and his biblical series, which we'll have a link to as well and his YouTube channel as well there. Plus a list of books that he recommends if you want to learn more about all this stuff, this archetypal everything that we dig into and we talk about. We're just scratching the surface a little bit ourselves here on that reading list. It's fantastic. So we'll have a link there to that. Please do connect with us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Facebook is Northern Myths Podcast. Twitter is at Northern Myths. We're also both personally on Twitter. I'm North Myth Luke, and Dan is North Myth Dan. Unfortunately, Northern Myths Luke, Northern Myths Dan, that is too long for a Twitter handle, apparently. But we're both there. And Instagram is Northern Myths Podcast again, right?
That's right.
So connect with us on any of the above, or leave comments for us on YouTube if you like. And at the moment, we're trying to reply to every comment and connect with everyone. We love having conversations with people, love connecting with our listeners. And if you just find us there, that's where we are. Is there anything else to mention here?
If you enjoy what you're hearing, you can like and subscribe and share and comment and all that kind of stuff. Just spread the word. It really helps us out a lot.
Yeah, we really appreciate, if you can go share. And if you're listening to this on the podcast, we also do have a YouTube channel. We've been getting through kind of a backlog of things we need to do to get back to making new clips, but we do plan on ramping that back up again. So check out our YouTube channel if you're just listening on the podcast, and give us a subscribe if you like it. And reviews are also super helpful on iTunes, Stitcher, Facebook, wherever. They're all super helpful, super welcome. So
that's about it for me.
Sounds good. Thank you again for listening, and we'll just leave you with the words of Carl Jung to find out what myth you're living, which we just find to be a great example of kind of what we're talking about. If you can, hear these stories and figure out who you might be emulating, maybe you can kind of see where that is leading, and maybe you can do something about that. So we'll leave you with that. Find out what myth you're living. And with that, this has been the Northern Myths Podcast. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.